You don't lose your life in big moments. You lose it in small reactions. One comment, one insult, one delay, one disrespect. And every time you react without thinking, you hand your power away. This audiobook is about taking it back, not by fighting harder, not by proving more, but by mastering the one skill that separates leaders from followers, the ability to not react. Because the moment you stop reacting, chaos loses its grip. Clarity takes control. Listen carefully. This will change how you move through the world. Chapter 1. Reacting is how you lose control. Most people believe they lose control when something bad happens. That's a lie. You don't lose control when life hits you. You lose control when you react without thinking. A comment, a look, a delay, a message left unseen, a tone you don't like, and suddenly your heart rate spikes, your mind races, your mouth opens, your fingers move. That moment, right there, that is where power is lost. Reaction is not strength. Reaction is exposure. Reaction is telling the world exactly where to hit you again. Understand this clearly. If someone can trigger you, they control you. Not tomorrow, not eventually, right now. Every uncontrolled reaction is a confession. It says, this gets to me. It says, this has power over me. It says, I am not in charge here. And the world listens. People learn very quickly what makes you react. And once they know, they don't need to defeat you. They only need to press the button. That's how arguments escalate. That's how careers collapse. That's how relationships rot from the inside. Not because of one big mistake, but because of repeated small reactions. Think about it. How many times have you said something you couldn't take back, not because it was true, but because you were emotional? How many times have you replied instantly and regretted it hours later? How many times have you reacted only to realize later that silence would have hurt more, protected more, preserved more? Reaction feels justified in the moment, but reaction is never strategic. Reaction is the nervous system panicking. Reaction is the ego defending its image. Reaction is fear dressed up as confidence. And the problem is this. The world is full of people who benefit from your reactions. They provoke, they poke, they disrespect quietly, just enough to test you. Because once you react, they've won. Not because they're right, but because they pulled you out of position. Powerful people don't react first. Weak people do. That's not an insult. That's a diagnosis. Children react. Adults pause. Amateurs react. Professionals observe. Followers react. Leaders calculate. Reaction collapses time. It shrinks your options down to impulse. Non-reaction expands time. It gives you space, and space gives you control. Right now, your job is not to become calmer. Your job is not to become nicer. Your job is to become unavailable to emotional manipulation. And that starts by understanding this truth. Not every emotion deserves expression. Not every thought deserves a voice. Not every trigger deserves a response. When you react instantly, you are letting the situation decide who you are. When you pause, you decide who you will be. Let me be very clear here. Not reacting does not mean you are weak. It means you are disciplined. It does not mean you are passive. It means you are selective. It does not mean you are scared.
It means you are controlled. Control is not loud. Control is not dramatic. Control is quiet, slow, and deliberate. Here's what reacting costs you. It costs you credibility. People stop taking you seriously when they know they can shake you. It costs you leverage. Once you reveal emotion, negotiation is over. It costs you peace, because every reaction extends the conflict in your mind long after the moment passes. And, worst of all, it trains your brain to stay on edge. You become jumpy, defensive, easily disturbed. That's not strength, that's exhaustion. So, here is your first behavioral instruction. This is not theory, this is practice. Delay your response. Not forever, not dramatically, just long enough to regain authority over yourself. When something triggers you, do not answer immediately. Do not explain, do not defend, do not correct. Pause. Even 5 seconds is enough to interrupt the reaction loop. In that pause, ask yourself one question. Is reacting going to give me power or take it away? If the answer is anything other than give, you stay silent. You breathe. You observe. You let the emotion pass without obeying it. Because emotions are instructions, but not all instructions are meant to be followed. This chapter is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming unmovable. Because the person who reacts the least controls the interaction the most. Remember this sentence. Burn it into your mind. If they can trigger you, they control you. And from this moment forward, your goal is simple. React less, observe more. That is how control begins. And that is the foundation of everything that follows.
Chapter 2. Silence is a strategic weapon. Most people think silence means weakness. They're wrong. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is contained power. The loudest person in the room is usually the most insecure. The calmest person is usually the one in control. Silence is uncomfortable. Not for you, but for everyone else. Because silence creates a vacuum, and weak minds rush to fill it. When you stay silent, people reveal themselves. They talk more. They explain too much. They expose their intentions. This is why silence works. Words give information. Silence takes it. Words show your position. Silence hides it. Words escalate conflict. Silence forces reflection. Most people speak to relieve tension inside themselves. They talk because they are uncomfortable not being understood. They talk because silence feels like losing. But silence is not losing. Silence is waiting. And waiting is control. Think about the last argument you witnessed. The moment one person stopped talking, the dynamic shifted. The other person either got louder, more emotional, or more desperate. Why? Because silence removes resistance, and without resistance, aggression has nowhere to land. Silence doesn't fight emotion. It lets emotion burn itself out. This is why calm people dominate chaotic situations. They don't feed the fire, they starve it. Silence forces the other person to confront their own behavior. When you don't react, they feel exposed. When you don't explain, they feel uncertain. And uncertainty makes people sloppy. Understand this deeply. You do not owe anyone a response. You do not owe explanations to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You do not owe clarity to people who are looking for control. You do not owe reactions to people who thrive on chaos.
Silence is how you decline an invitation to drama. This does not mean you never speak. It means you speak only when it benefits you. Powerful people speak last, or not at all. They don't rush to fill space. They let space work for them. Silence signals confidence. It says, I don't need to convince you. It says, I am not threatened. It says, I am grounded enough to wait. That message is felt immediately. In negotiations, silence is leverage. In conflict, silence is insulation. In provocation, silence is armor. Here's the mistake most people make. They use silence emotionally. They go silent to punish, to manipulate, to sulk. That's not power. That's passive aggression. Strategic silence is different. Strategic silence is calm, neutral, unreactive. It is silence without tension. And that's what unsettles people. Because when you're silent and calm, they can't read you. They can't predict you. They can't control the outcome. Here's a real-world example. Someone criticizes you unfairly. Old behavior, you explain, you defend, you justify. You give them more words to twist. New behavior, you pause. You say nothing. You let the statement sit in the air. Suddenly, they start walking it back. They soften. They add context. Not because you argued well, but because silence made them hear themselves. Another example. Someone sends an emotional message looking for a reaction. Old behavior, instant reply. New behavior, no immediate response. Not ignoring, not blocking, just not reacting. By the time you reply later, the emotional charge is gone. You didn't absorb their chaos. You let it dissipate. This is the discipline you are building. You are training yourself to not leak power through words. Here is your behavioral instruction for this chapter. When you feel the urge to respond immediately, especially when emotional, do the opposite. Wait. Count to 10. Close the app. Step away. Then ask yourself, will speaking improve my position or weaken it? If silence improves your position, stay silent. Because silence is not empty. It is full of intention. Repeat this until it becomes instinct. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is selection. You are choosing when and how you engage. And when you stop reacting verbally, you gain something far more valuable: clarity. You hear more. You notice more. You see patterns you missed before. Silence sharpens perception, and perception is power. Remember this line. Carry it with you. Silence makes weak people uncomfortable, and powerful people clear. The more you practice silence, the less people can manipulate you with noise. And that brings us closer to the real enemy, the part of you that demands to be heard. That's not wisdom. That's ego. And that's exactly what we'll dismantle next.
Chapter 3. Your ego is the real trigger. You think people trigger you. They don't. Situations don't trigger you. Words don't trigger you. Disrespect doesn't trigger you. Your ego does. The ego is the part of you that needs to be seen, validated, respected, and protected at all times. And when it feels threatened, it reacts instantly. Not intelligently, not strategically, emotionally. The ego hates being ignored. It hates being questioned. It hates being corrected. And most importantly, it hates losing status. That's why a small comment can ruin your mood. That's why criticism feels personal. That's why silence from others feels like rejection. Not because the situation is dangerous, but because the ego believes its identity is under attack. Here is the truth most people never accept. Ego reacts. Discipline observes. The ego wants to prove. Discipline wants to understand. The ego wants to win now. Discipline wants to win long term. The ego wants emotional relief. Discipline wants control. Every time you react impulsively, it is your ego demanding immediate validation. Think about it. Why does disrespect sting? Because the ego wants to be acknowledged as important. Why does criticism hurt? Because the ego wants to be seen as competent. Why does being ignored trigger anger? Because the ego equates attention with worth. But none of those things determine your actual value. They only threaten the image you're trying to protect, and that image is fragile. That's why ego-driven people are easy to manipulate. Compliment them and they soften. Challenge them and they explode. They are predictable, and predictability is weakness. People who master not reacting have one thing in common. They are not obsessed with defending their image. They don't need to look right. They don't need to be liked. They don't need the last word, because their sense of self is internal. Here's the shift you must make. Stop asking, how does this make me look? Start asking, how does reacting serve me? Ego never asks that question. Ego only asks, how do I feel right now? And feelings are terrible decision makers. Ego makes everything personal. Discipline makes everything situational. That comment wasn't about you. That tone wasn't about you. That delay wasn't about you. But ego hears threat everywhere. And when ego feels threatened, it demands action. Immediate action. Unfiltered action. That's the reaction you're learning to break. This is not about killing the ego. That's impossible. This is about putting the ego in its place. The ego can speak, but it does not get to decide. Here's a powerful reframe. Every trigger is an invitation to defend, an invitation to explain, an invitation to react. You do not have to accept the invitation. Declining ego-driven reactions is an act of maturity. Here's a real-world example. Someone questions your decision publicly. Old behavior, you explain yourself, you justify, you feel exposed. New behavior, you pause, you listen. You respond only if necessary and briefly. You don't defend your identity. You state facts or you say nothing. That's not weakness, that's self-possession. Another example. Someone insults you subtly. Old behavior, you confront, you escalate, you burn energy. New behavior, you notice, you file the information, you adjust how you deal with them. You don't react emotionally, you respond strategically, later, if at all. That's how ego loses its grip. Now here is your behavioral instruction. When you feel triggered, ask yourself this question silently. Which part of me is reacting right now, my ego or my discipline? If it's ego, you do nothing. You breathe, you delay, you let the urge pass. Because ego urgency fades quickly, discipline patience compounds. This practice will feel uncomfortable at first. Ego hates being ignored. It will tell you that silence equals weakness, that not responding means losing, that you must act now. That's a lie. The strongest people you know are not the most reactive. They are the least affected. They don't rush. They don't flinch. They don't scramble to protect their image. They let others talk. They let situations unfold. Because they know something most people don't. You don't need to prove power. You need to preserve it. Every ego-driven reaction leaks power. Every disciplined pause stores it. This chapter is about reclaiming authorship over your behavior.
You are not your emotions. You are not your triggers. You are not your ego. You are the one who decides whether to act or not. Remember this line: ego reacts, discipline observes. And as you continue, you'll learn the most important skill of all: how to pause long enough to see the trap before it closes.
Chapter 4. Pause long enough to see the trap. Most people don't fall into traps. They rush into them, not because they are stupid, but because they are emotional. Traps don't work on calm minds. They work on rushed ones. The trap is never obvious. It's disguised as urgency. Respond now. Decide now. Defend yourself now. Say something, anything now. Urgency is the enemy of clarity. When someone pressures you to react quickly, they are not asking for your best decision. They are asking for your unfiltered one. That's how manipulation works. Pressure collapses time, and when time collapses, judgment disappears. This is why reacting feels automatic. Your nervous system believes speed equals survival. But in modern life, most threats are not dangerous. They are social, psychological, ego-based. And yet you respond as if your life depends on it. That's the trap. The pause breaks the spell. Even a short pause, a breath, a moment of stillness creates distance between stimulus and response. And in that distance, something powerful happens. You start to see. You notice tone. You notice timing. You notice intent. You realize the comment wasn't accidental. The question wasn't innocent. The urgency wasn't necessary. The pause reveals motive. This is why disciplined people seem impossible to corner. They don't rush. They don't answer loaded questions immediately. They don't respond emotionally to pressure. They don't explain themselves on demand. They slow everything down. And when you slow things down, you flip the power dynamic. The person pushing urgency gets uncomfortable because urgency only works when you cooperate. Here's an important truth. Anyone who benefits from your reaction will try to rush you into it. Sales pressure, emotional guilt, provocation disguised as just being honest. It all relies on speed. The pause is your refusal to play along. Here's a real-world example. Someone confronts you aggressively. They raise their voice. They accuse. They demand answers. Old behavior, you match their energy. You defend. You escalate. New behavior, you pause. You let the silence stretch. You don't mirror chaos. You become still. That stillness forces them to hear themselves. Another example. Someone sends a message designed to provoke: sarcasm, blame, passive aggression. Old behavior, immediate reply. New behavior, no instant response. Not because you're afraid, but because you're thinking. By the time you respond, you are no longer inside their emotional frame. You've stepped outside it. That's the pause at work. The pause doesn't make you passive. It makes you perceptive. You begin to notice patterns. Who always pressures you to decide quickly? Who reacts badly when you don't respond immediately? Who loses control when you stay calm? Those reactions tell you everything. The pause turns confusion into clarity. Now let's get practical. Here is your behavioral instruction for this chapter. When urgency appears, real or manufactured, you slow down, you say less, you breathe more. You do not explain your pause. You do not apologize for it. You simply take it. Even saying, "I'll get back to you," is enough. That sentence alone protects your power because it tells the world, "I decide the pace," and pace is control.
This will feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to pleasing, explaining, reacting quickly to avoid tension. But tension is not danger. Let it exist. Let others feel it. The pause is not about winning the moment. It's about avoiding the mistake. Most regret comes from rushed reactions, not thoughtful delays. No one regrets waiting 5 minutes. They regret speaking too soon. Remember this: the pause is where power lives, not in speed, not in clever words, not in emotional expression, but in restraint. As you practice pausing, you'll notice something change. People stop pushing as hard. They become more careful. They choose their words more precisely. Why? Because they can't control you anymore. And when others lose control over you, you gain something invaluable: freedom. In the next chapter, we'll go even deeper, because once you pause, you realize a dangerous truth. Not everything deserves a response, and knowing what to ignore is one of the highest forms of intelligence.
Chapter 5. Not everything deserves a response. One of the most dangerous beliefs you carry is that every situation requires your input. It doesn't. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every opinion deserves acknowledgement. Not every provocation deserves energy. Responding to everything is not openness. It is poor boundaries. Your attention is not unlimited. Your energy is not free. Every response you give costs you something: time, focus, emotional bandwidth. And most people spend these resources like they are infinite. They are not. Highly controlled people understand a simple truth: attention is currency, and reacting is how you spend it carelessly. When you respond to nonsense, you validate it. When you argue with foolishness, you elevate it. When you explain yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you, you weaken your position. Silence in those moments is not avoidance. It is discernment. Powerful people are selective. They don't engage with everything that reaches them. They filter. Because reacting to everything puts you on the same level as everything, and not everything is equal. Here's the reality most people resist. Some people don't want resolution. They want reaction. They want to pull you into their emotional state. They want to disrupt your calm. They want to feel powerful by controlling your response. When you engage, you give them exactly what they want. Not agreement, not understanding, attention. And attention is the reward. This is why ignoring provocations works. Not because it proves a point, but because it starves the behavior. No fuel, no fire. Let's be clear. Ignoring is not pretending something didn't happen. Ignoring is choosing not to invest in it. You still see, you still note, you still remember, but you don't react. That distinction matters. Here's a real-world example. Someone makes a snide comment in a group. They're fishing. Old behavior, you reply sharply. You defend. You escalate. New behavior, you say nothing. You let it hang. The moment passes. The power play fails. Why? Because their comment required your reaction to matter. Without it, it dies. Another example. Someone sends a long emotional message designed to pull you into drama. Old behavior, you respond point by point. New behavior, you don't respond immediately or at all. Not because you're afraid, but because the message doesn't deserve the access.
You are not obligated to attend every emotional invitation. This is a critical mindset shift. Your response is optional. You've been trained to believe it's mandatory, that silence is rude, that not responding is wrong. That's conditioning. In reality, silence is a boundary, and boundaries are a sign of self-respect. Here is your behavioral instruction for this chapter. Before responding to anything, message, comment, confrontation, ask yourself 3 questions. Does this deserve my energy? Does responding improve my position? Would silence communicate more power? If the answer to the 3rd question is yes, you stay silent. You don't explain the silence. You don't justify it. You let it do its work. This will feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to over-explaining. But over-explaining is a form of insecurity. It signals that you need approval. Powerful people don't chase approval. They decide standards. And one of those standards is this: I do not engage with everything. When you stop reacting to low-value stimuli, your life changes. You feel lighter, calmer, more focused. Your mind isn't constantly pulled outward. And here's what's interesting. When you stop responding to nonsense, people start being more careful around you. They think before speaking. They choose words more deliberately because they know they don't automatically get access to your attention. That's respect. Not demanded, earned through restraint. Remember this phrase: your response is optional. Repeat it until it becomes instinct. You don't owe the world your reactions. You owe yourself your peace. And as you get better at ignoring what doesn't matter, something powerful happens. Your calm becomes intimidating because calm signals selectivity, and selectivity signals control. In the next chapter, we'll explore why calmness itself is not just peace, it is dominance.
Chapter 6. Calm is a form of dominance. Most people misunderstand dominance. They think it's loud, aggressive, forceful. That's not dominance. That's insecurity on display. Real dominance is calm. Calm under pressure. Calm under provocation. Calm when everyone else is emotional. Because calm tells a story without words. It says, I'm not threatened. It says, I'm not rushing. It says, I am in control of myself and therefore the situation. Chaos feeds on reaction. Calm starves it. This is why emotional people lose influence quickly. They may be loud, but they are unstable. And instability erodes trust. People don't follow the most emotional person in the room. They follow the most grounded one. Calmness is grounding. When you remain calm, others unconsciously adjust to your pace. They lower their voice. They slow their words. They begin to regulate themselves. That's dominance, not through force, but through presence. Here's the key insight. The calm person controls the room, not by speaking more, but by reacting less. Calm makes emotional behavior look irrational. When someone is upset and you are composed, the contrast is powerful. They look out of control. You look authoritative. This is why remaining calm in conflict often wins without saying much. You don't need to overpower. You outlast. Let's look at real-world examples. In a heated discussion, one person raises their voice. They interrupt. They push. The other person stays measured. They speak slowly. They pause between sentences.
Who appears stronger? Always the second, because control of emotion is interpreted as control of outcome. In professional settings, this matters more than intelligence. The person who stays calm under stress is seen as leadership material. The one who reacts emotionally is seen as a liability. Calm is credibility. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means not letting emotion dictate behavior. You can feel anger without acting angry. You can feel pressure without rushing. That separation is emotional mastery. Here's the mistake people make. They try to look calm while internally boiling. That's not calm. That's tension disguised. True calm comes from detachment, from knowing that you don't need to win this moment to win overall. Dominant people think long-term. They don't trade composure for short-term relief. Now, here is your behavioral instruction. When tension rises, slow everything down. Slow your speech, slow your movements, slow your breathing. The body leads the mind. When you slow the body, the mind follows. This is not theory. This is physiology. Your nervous system takes cues from your behavior. Act calm, and calm follows. This alone will change how people respond to you. Another instruction: do not match emotional energy. If someone is loud, you go quiet. If someone is rushed, you go slow. If someone is reactive, you stay neutral. Contrast creates control. Matching escalates. Contrasting dominates. This is why calm people seem untouchable. They don't absorb chaos, they deflect it. And over time, people stop trying to provoke them, because provocation without reaction is pointless. Here's a powerful truth. People test boundaries to see where control lies. When you remain calm, you show them exactly where it is, inside you. Not in their words, not in their behavior. Calm says, I decide how this goes. This chapter is about redefining power, not as force, but as stability. Because stability is rare, and rare things are respected. Remember this phrase: the calm person controls the room. Carry it into every interaction. And as you continue mastering calm, you'll discover something surprising. The more calm you become, the less you need to engage at all. Which leads us to the next level of freedom: emotional clarity.
Chapter 7. Emotional control creates mental clarity. Most people believe clarity comes from thinking harder. It doesn't. Clarity comes from emotional control. When emotions spike, intelligence drops. That's not an insult. That's biology. The emotional brain reacts fast. The rational brain works slow. And when you react emotionally, you shut down the part of you that sees consequences. This is why bad decisions feel right in the moment and wrong later. Emotion narrows vision. Control widens it. When you stop reacting, your mind becomes quiet enough to notice details: tone, timing, patterns, intent. You stop guessing. You start seeing. This is the reward of restraint. Most confusion in life is not caused by lack of information. It's caused by too much emotion. Anger makes everything feel urgent. Fear makes everything feel threatening. Ego makes everything feel personal. Remove the emotion,
and the situation becomes simple. Not easy, but clear. Clear enough to act deliberately. Here's an uncomfortable truth. If you're constantly confused, you're probably emotionally reactive. You're too involved, too invested in being right, too attached to outcomes. Detachment sharpens thinking. This is why surgeons stay calm, pilots stay calm, leaders stay calm. Not because they don't care, but because clarity saves lives, decisions, and futures. Now look at your own life. Where do you feel foggy? Where do you feel stuck? Where do you feel unsure? That fog is emotional residue, leftover reactions, unprocessed triggers, mental noise. When you stop reacting, the noise fades, and when noise fades, clarity emerges. Here's a real-world example. Someone criticizes you. Emotionally, you feel attacked. Mentally, you feel confused. But when you pause and remove emotion, you see the truth. Is the criticism valid? Is it projection? Is it irrelevant? You can only answer that when you're calm. Another example. You're deciding whether to leave a job, end a relationship, or confront a situation. Emotional urgency clouds judgment. Control buys you time, and time reveals reality. Most mistakes are not made because of lack of intelligence. They are made because of emotional impatience. Here's your behavioral instruction. When faced with a decision, do not decide while emotionally charged. Wait until the emotion settles. Sleep on it. Step away. Breathe. Then reassess. If the answer changes after calm returns, emotion was driving the decision. If the answer stays the same, it's probably right. This simple rule will save you years of regret. Another instruction. Separate observation from interpretation. Observation is what happened. Interpretation is how you feel about it. Emotion merges the two. Clarity separates them. Say to yourself, this is what happened. This is how I feel. These are not the same. That separation restores control. Clarity also changes how you speak. You become precise, measured, intentional. You don't ramble. You don't over-explain. You don't justify emotionally, because clarity doesn't need defense. This is why emotionally controlled people sound confident. Not loud, not aggressive, certain. People trust certainty, and certainty comes from calm analysis. Remember this phrase: clarity follows control. Not emotion, not urgency, control. As your emotional reactions decrease, your mental accuracy increases. You stop misreading people. You stop misjudging situations. You stop creating problems in your head. Life becomes simpler, not because life changed, but because you did. And when your mind becomes clear, you notice something else. True power is not loud, emotional, or dramatic. It is quiet. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't chase validation. And that's exactly what we'll break down next.
Chapter 8. Power is quiet, not loud. Weak power is loud. Strong power is quiet. This is one of the clearest markers of maturity you will ever learn. People who lack power talk about it. People who have it don't need to. They don't announce. They don't threaten. They don't perform. They move quietly, and the world adjusts. Loudness is compensation. It's what people use when they don't feel secure. They over-explain. They over-assert. They overreact. because silence would expose uncertainty. Quiet people don't need to convince. They don't need to win every exchange. They let outcomes speak. This is why quiet confidence is intimidating. You can't argue with it. You can't destabilize it. You can't provoke it easily. It doesn't rise to meet you. It stays grounded. Here's the truth. Real power doesn't announce itself. It shows up in restraint. In someone who doesn't rush to speak. In someone who listens more than they talk. In someone who doesn't need the last word. Quiet power is comfortable with ambiguity. It doesn't fill silence to ease tension. It lets silence work. This is why experienced leaders speak less than beginners. Why authority figures don't argue with subordinates. Why respected people don't chase validation. They know something. The more you talk, the more you reveal. The more you react, the more you expose. Quietness protects position. Think about high-status individuals. They don't comment on everything. They don't defend themselves publicly. They don't explain their choices to everyone. Not because they're arrogant, but because explanation is unnecessary when authority is established. This doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you become intentional. You speak when it matters. You stay quiet when it doesn't. Here's a real-world example. Someone challenges you in a group. They expect debate. They expect reaction. Old behavior, you argue. New behavior, you respond briefly or not at all. Your restraint reframes the situation. Suddenly, they look needy, overeager, unbalanced. You look composed. Another example. Someone spreads noise, gossip, or opinion. Old behavior, you address it publicly. New behavior, you do nothing. And because you don't react, the noise fades. Quiet power doesn't chase shadows. Now here is your behavioral instruction. Before speaking, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say necessary or just emotional? If it's emotional, you don't say it. If it's necessary, you say it cleanly, briefly, without explanation. This discipline changes how people perceive you. You become harder to read, in a good way. People stop trying to test you, because testing requires reaction. Quiet people don't give it. There's also a deeper layer here. Quiet power comes from self-trust. When you trust yourself, you don't need external validation. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You don't need approval. You let misunderstanding exist. That's strength. Most people react because they are terrified of being misjudged. Quiet power accepts it because it knows being misjudged by the wrong people is not a loss. It's a filter. Remember this phrase, real power doesn't announce itself. The more you internalize this, the less reactive you become. You stop performing. You stop explaining. You stop competing for attention. And in that silence, something powerful emerges. Freedom. Because when you don't need to prove anything, no one can provoke you. Which brings us to the next level. Detachment. Not indifference, not coldness. Freedom. Chapter 9. Detachment is freedom. Most people think detachment means not caring. It doesn't. Detachment means not being controlled. You can care deeply and still refuse to react emotionally. That's freedom. Attachment is what makes you predictable. Detachment is what makes you untouchable. When you're attached to outcomes, opinions control you. When you're attached to validation, rejection destroys your focus. When you're attached to being understood,
Misinterpretation feels like an attack. Detachment cuts these strings. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you independent. Here's the truth. Nothing controls you unless you let it. People don't have power over you. Your attachment gives them power. The moment you emotionally depend on an outcome, you surrender leverage. This is why detachment is feared. It removes pressure points. You can't threaten someone who doesn't need your approval. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't need your validation. Detachment doesn't mean you disengage from life. It means you stop outsourcing your emotional stability. Here's a real-world example. You send a message, no reply. Attachment creates anxiety. Detachment creates neutrality. One drains energy, the other preserves it. Another example. Someone criticizes you unfairly. Attachment creates defensiveness. Detachment creates observation. You don't internalize noise, you analyze it. Detachment shifts your relationship with emotion. You still feel, but you don't obey. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. That's mastery. Now here is your behavioral instruction. When something triggers emotion, say this internally. I am observing this feeling, not acting on it. That sentence creates separation. It reminds you that emotion passes, but consequences don't. Another instruction. Lower the importance you assign to other people's reactions. Most reactions are projections, reflections of their internal state. When you detach, you stop taking responsibility for emotions that aren't yours. This is a massive release. You stop trying to manage others. You stop reacting to their moods. You stay anchored. Detachment also changes how you handle loss. Rejection doesn't crush you. Failure doesn't destabilize you. Because your identity is not tied to temporary outcomes, you remain steady. This steadiness is rare, and rare qualities create authority. Remember this phrase, nothing controls you unless you let it. As detachment deepens, your reactions fade. You stop chasing, stop forcing, stop explaining. And in that stillness, you become difficult to manipulate. This is not indifference, it is emotional sovereignty, and sovereignty is power. In the final chapter, we will integrate everything, not as techniques, but as identity. You won't just practice not reacting, you'll become someone who can't be shaken. Chapter 10. Become untouchable. At the beginning of this audiobook, you learned how to not react. Now you learn how to be someone who doesn't need to. This is the final shift. Not behavior, not strategy, identity. Because the highest level of control is when restraint is no longer effort, it's automatic. Untouchable people don't wake up each day deciding whether to react. They simply don't. Not because they're numb, not because they're superior, but because their nervous system is trained to stay grounded. They have seen what reactions cost. They have felt the regret. They have paid the price. And they decided never again. Becoming untouchable is not about perfection. It's about consistency. You don't need to never react. You need to react less and less. Each time you pause instead of explode, you reinforce the identity. Each time you stay silent instead of explaining, you strengthen it. Each time you walk away emotionally intact, you become harder to shake. This is how identity is built, through repeated evidence. Untouchable people share a few traits. They speak slowly. They listen carefully. They respond selectively. They are not impressed easily, not offended easily, not rushed easily. because nothing outside them moves faster than their internal control. This doesn't happen overnight. It is trained. And here is the final behavioral framework to lock this in. First, slow your life down. Most reactivity comes from speed. Too many inputs, too much noise, too little space. Untouchable people create space. They don't live in constant stimulation. They don't answer everything immediately. They don't rush decisions. They design their life to support calm. Second, reduce emotional exposure. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not every opinion deserves entry. Not every conflict deserves attention. Untouchable people are selective about who they let influence their state. They choose environments carefully. They limit drama. They protect their baseline. This is not avoidance, it's intelligence. Third, respond only from clarity. If you are emotional, you wait. If you are rushed, you wait. If you are triggered, you wait. Untouchable people never respond from chaos. They let emotion pass, then decide. This alone separates you from most of the world. Fourth, let results speak. Untouchable people don't argue narratives. They build outcomes. They don't convince, they demonstrate. They don't defend their character, they live it. When people try to provoke them, they don't react. They outperform. This is the highest form of response. Now, understand this. Becoming untouchable will confuse people. Some will think you're distant. Some will think you're cold. Some will test you harder. That's normal. You are no longer predictable. And unpredictability, combined with calm, is intimidating. Let it be. You are not here to be liked by everyone. You are here to be in control of yourself. And here is the final truth of this book. Nothing external gives you power, and nothing external can take it unless you react. That's it. Not reacting is not weakness. It is mastery. It is the ability to feel deeply without acting recklessly. It is the ability to observe chaos without becoming it. It is the ability to remain steady in a world addicted to noise. You are no longer trying to win moments. You are building a life that cannot be destabilized. Remember who you are becoming. Someone who pauses. Someone who sees. Someone who decides. Someone untouchable.
You've heard the message. Now you decide who you are. The world will keep provoking. People will keep testing. Noise will keep demanding your attention. That will not stop. What changes is you. From this moment forward, you pause instead of reacting. You observe instead of exploding. You choose restraint instead of impulse. Because every reaction costs power, and every pause builds it. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to defend your ego. You don't need to win every moment. You need control. Here is your challenge. For the next 7 days, react to nothing immediately. No messages, no comments, no provocations. Pause. Breathe. Decide. And watch what happens. Watch your clarity sharpen. Watch your confidence stabilize. Watch how people lose the ability to shake you. This is not silence. This is strength. This is not weakness. This is mastery. And once you feel it, you will never give it back. Because the one who controls their reactions controls their life.